So if you guys have been living under a rock, some big changes have been happening to EVO, the premier fighting game tournament, and which has been the premier fighting game tournament for decades at this point. So first off, before the main story broke out, there was an initial little news bump, which was that Nodwin buys Sony Interactive Entertainment's stake in Evolution Championship Series. So this was almost received as good news for some people, right? So as most of you may have known, a large percent of the ownership of EVO went to Sony, and it was partnered with Sony, I think, since 2023 at minimum, maybe 2022. Basically, the post-COVID years, it had been partnered with Sony. And Nodwin bought out that stake in EVO, and Sony decided to return as a major sponsor, not as a part owner of EVO. And I was like, oh, cool. Does that mean we won't get PS5 tournaments? Probably not. Like, that doesn't... It probably means we're still getting PS5 Street Fighter 6 tournaments for the time being, not just for the sponsorship portion of this deal remaining where Sony is still on board as a sponsor, but just for practical reasons like the vendors and setup suppliers, companies like, 2G Gaming, if I'm remembering the name correctly. They have a fleet of PS5s to make these events happen. It might mean the return of Smash Brothers, if anything, as a possibility to EVO, since it's not officially owned by any one console that would want to or be concerned with game exclusivity in that sense. So that might be the change we see from this. And if you're anything like me, I was like, what is Nodwin? So Nodwin, it turns out, is an Indian-based esports company. And all respect to my fellow gamers in India, I was not familiar with the India esports scene. In fact, as far as I was concerned, the only popular or famous esport in India was chess. Chess is huge in India. Shout out to my boy Gukesh, right? About to take down Magnus Carlsen, or already doing it, about to be the world champ. So I had to look into it. I was like, what are they playing over in India? Turns out they're all about the mobile games, man. So the chess is number 2 in terms of earnings in India, but it's all about PUBG Mobile. And then the next big one I saw was Free Fire, which as far as I can tell is a mobile kind of knockoff Fortnite game. So they're all about PUBG Mobile. And so I had to be like, okay, cool. We'll see if that means anything for EVO. I don't know of any actual FGC in India. I'm sure it exists, so I would love to learn more about it. But I haven't personally seen too much of an Indian FGC or representation from India in like the traditional fighting game community. So it definitely felt like a weird pairing. It didn't feel like a natural evolution from Sony to Nodwin Gaming in terms of this ownership. But that was quickly overshadowed by the actual controversial buyout, which was Qiddya Gaming fully acquiring major ownership of RTS and therefore the majority ownership of EVO itself. And Kadia, if you don't know, is part of Saudi Arabia's investment into their Project 2030 initiative to pivot their economy away from an oil-based only economy to diversifying their economic options, which includes things like tourism. And this is part of their ongoing effort going across industries all over the world and all sorts of entertainment sectors as well to buy out these different gaming events, sporting events. We've seen it with F1, we've seen it with golf, we've seen it with boxing, where they have basically unlimited funds right now to buy out all of these different industries in an effort to potentially diversify their economic investments and shift their economy away from being only oil-based, which will eventually, as a natural resource, be depleted, right? So there was a risk of this for their own GDP. So this has been the initiative they're going through. And part of this strategy is, of course, like people are mentioning in the chat, it's part of sports washing, right? Like Saudi Arabia, they've been under fire for a lot of human rights abuses. Culturally, it's not really matching with a lot of like Western sort of values. So it's a very politically charged thing. And I definitely encourage people on either side to do their own research on this. I don't really want to get heavy into the politics of what's going on here. Just know that this is not an investment in terms of a business. This is an investment in terms of a strategy to build their cultural influence. Eventually, maybe tourism more inviting to other people across the planet. It's not a buyout of a business that they expect to make a return on in cash. It's very controversial, and it has led to a lot of debates A lot of mudslinging all over Twitter. It's getting pretty ugly out there, and it's pretty disappointing for a lot of people who feel impacted by this buyout, since basically this once grassroots event, which had already grown kind of far beyond that, especially with the part Sony ownership and the scale that it's gotten, is now fully owned by a branch of the Saudi government. Right? This is not a business. It's not a private company buying out EVO. This is a branch of the Saudi government. It would be almost equivalent if like the US military owned EVO, right? So I think there's a big divide in international audiences when they see a lot of like American reactions to this. From the American perspective, there's like a big difference between a private business owning an event and supporting that versus the actual governing body owning that. So this would be like if the US Army owned EVO. That's kind of an equivalent comparison, or at least like, you know, the US government, the federal government owning EVO. It's a different perspective from the Western audience than like Sony owning EVO or like another large corporation owning EVO, right? But the big thing here is, you know, this wasn't even, I don't even know if this was supposed to be known that this was a full ownership of RTS, which means they're the majority owner of EVO. But it was announced by this guy, Muhammad Aldawood, on LinkedIn. Here's the post here. Kadia has acquired full ownership of RTS, a strategic step that will further strengthen our esports business and unlock new opportunities across the broader gaming ecosystem. And most importantly, this will enable Qiddya to keep fueling the continued growth of EVO, the world's largest fighting game event since 1996, with unlimited potentials. This milestone paves the way for setting new heights in the evolution of EVO toward achieving the aspirations of the fighting game community. So it's written there plain to see. They want to expand EVO even more, and this is where I get very concerned, right? So like I mentioned before, this is part of their Saudi Vision 2030 initiative. I definitely recommend reading into that. But my main concern about this is talking about expanding EVO. And even if, say you're on this side where you don't care about any potential moral quandaries, you have no concerns about this change in ownership, I'm going to talk about this from a bit of a more economics perspective, because I have concerns. I have major concerns about the event itself. So I've already been a little uneasy about EVO's current growth trajectory. EVO used to be only EVO in Las Vegas. Then they added EVO Japan. It became a bi-yearly event, and there was 2 stop points throughout the year: EVO Vegas, EVO Japan. Now we're having EVO France. EVO France is happening in several weeks. I feel like I just got back from EVO Vegas. And in fact, I feel like EVO Vegas just happened. I blinked after EVO Japan, and Mena RD is holding another EVO trophy. I barely got a chance to digest what had just occurred, and Mena RD is already up there, you know, just completely destroying Kakadu. Won't leave that man alone, claiming another EVO title. And now EVO France is about to begin. I strongly feel that the EVO brand, before this investment from Kadia, which they were already a major sponsor, by the way, just to be clear, they had already been sponsoring EVO, they just didn't own it. That growth was already fueled by, I believe, this sponsorship. It's already saturating the brand. And from just a pure fan of the game, I feel like the EVO title has become extremely saturated in that sense. I don't personally know if I care. Let me rephrase that. I know I don't care as much about EVO France as I do EVO Vegas. I know for a fact, right? However, in terms of like legacy for players going forward, there's a weird thing happening where the saturation and the overexposure of the EVO brand could potentially, in my view, harm the brand in the long term. I think that's a risk. However, does that hurt EVO's bottom line? Probably not. You know, EVO will probably become this moving fighting game convention with a very prestigious fighting game tournament attached to it, and it will allow people from all over the world to attend and participate in the EVO experience, which is definitely a big benefit. So many people will be very happy about having multiple EVOs, having EVOs in their region. So that can be a good thing. However, I want to talk a bit about sustainability in the FGC. It's long been known that EVO has actually been one of the worst paying tournaments for its size and prestige ever. In fact, the largest prize pool ever for a Street Fighter tournament, or believe a tournament ever at EVO, correct me if I'm wrong here, at least for Street Fighter, was EVO 2016 for Street Fighter V, where Infiltration won $50,000 for first place. And this is not due to having unlimited number of entrants. In fact, we only had 5,000 entrants, which was a record-breaking tournament at the time, but we've seen much larger tournaments since then, tournaments with fewer amount of prize dollars available. This was a $100,000 prize pool. This had this large of a prize pool because of investment from Capcom themselves to promote the Capcom Pro Tour. Typically, for a tournament, the way the prize pool is generated is you pay $10 per tournament you enter. That goes to the prize pool, right? Goes to the prize pot. So it will be $10 times the number of entrants will determine the prize pool. So this would have been a $51,000 tournament. Instead, $50K was thrown in by Capcom, making it $101,000, right? That was 2016. Compare that to 2022, the first EVO post-COVID. So there was a significant drop off in terms of players, right? 1,324. And the prize pool reflected that. It was only a $13,000, $240 prize pool. So Kawano in 2022, 6 years later, won $5,560 for winning EVO. And this is also due in part because there was no 50K from Capcom. So you can see the massive discrepancy here in terms of the prize pool and the prestige. Now go even further. The most recent EVO in Vegas, Mena RD, he won a 4,233 man tournament, rather comparable to what Infiltration won in 2016. He got $16,000, about $17,000 if you round up. This is due to it being directly pulled from the number of entrants, 4,233 entrants. That means $42,330 for the prize pool. EVO has now, since the Sony partnership and the Qiddya sponsorships, they have improved their pricing by offering a minimum guarantee of $30,000 in the prize pool. So Marvel 2 returned to EVO this year, and Chaos got 12th K for first place, divvying up that minimum guarantee of $30,000. Essentially, if the tournament doesn't reach 3,000 players, then they put up $30,000 for the prize pool. If you go over 3,000 players, EVO pockets the rest of the pot money to subsidize, or rather they pocket their 30,000 that they would have added to the prize pool to subsidize these other prizes. So they just have a guarantee of $30,000, but they don't add $30,000 on top of the actual pot paid for by the players. So Street Fighter having 4,000 entrants, basically they're like, oh, thank God this game got this many entrants. We don't have to put any money into this prize pool for Street Fighter 6. Instead, we can distribute that to other games that get less than 3,000 entrants. It's not like they're adding a prize pool, they're adding a prize minimum guarantee. And so therefore, that's great. That was an improvement for the players for sure. But it doesn't mean that EVO is like the prestigious big money tournament. Now, meanwhile, look at the other events, right? You go to Shanghai, look at his results and winnings. All you got to do is look at Street Fighter 6 here and go to Esports World Cup. He just won a cool $250,000 tournament at Esports World Cup and did that twice. So this money, once again, comes from the Saudi Arabian government. My point for these examples being, we are probably going to enter an era, I would predict, that we're going to start seeing pricing increase. I would not be surprised if the numbers at EVO for the pricing start to inflate. And once again, I want to remind you that this pricing that we saw with the minimum 30K, that was with Sony ownership, with Qiddya sponsorship, not ownership. That was with Chipotle sponsorships. There were so many factors contributing to actually making that possible, and the record-breaking attendance. And even then, that was the best they could do. That was the best that they could offer the players. This money being thrown around by Saudi is not a sustainable business model. It's not an investment to make a return on these events. They are not investing into a product or into an event where they expect to directly make money. They don't expect to inflate prize pools, to scale up EVO, to directly make a return on these investments. It's sports washing to encourage people to visit Saudi Arabia, to grow their influence for the rest of the world, and to, clean up their reputation a bit, right? It's a PR scheme for Saudi. It's not intended to make a return. Therefore, we are potentially scaling these events to unsustainable levels where if Saudi ever stops writing the checks to keep this going, the whole house of cards could collapse. We've seen this before too. The FGC has been in actually a really interesting position where they've avoided the major collapse of esports. Here's this article from 2019. Shady numbers and bad business inside the esports bubble. They predicted this back in 2019. It used to be touted for years that esports championships were getting more viewership, higher viewership numbers in the Super Bowl. And that was a lie. 4 years in the 2010 era, venture capitalists were pouring funds, millions and millions of dollars into these esports orgs in order to potentially make a return on investment. It was a gold rush at that time. There was a prediction that esports would become the biggest thing in the world. It would be bigger than football, bigger than the NBA, because it's international. It's a large growing audience, and there's no limit to the audience you can capture and potentially monetize on this. We saw esports orgs rise up. We saw your favorite FGC players were getting 6-figure plus salaries in the FGC to attend Capcom Pro Tour tournaments. They were getting 6 figures plus to fly around the world playing video games, where these teams would also pay for their travel on top of that. I was personally on CLG, right? I was on CLG. I had a salary with CLG, an org that won the LCS, right? They did the thing, the NA LCS, whatever it's called, right? They won championships, man. They did the thing in League. They're a legacy OG org. And then I was there for the call where the entire org got let go, disbanded, everyone fired, dozens of people losing their jobs instantly because Madison Square Garden cut off the money valve, and that was it. There was no business. There was no return on investment anywhere. At no point did any of this make money, right? The only people who have made money from the esports gold rush has been the publishers. For the publishers, it actually makes sense for them to invest in this sort of thing, because when people are chasing their dreams, trying to become the Capcom Cup champion, when teams are paying to fly players all over the planet, they are actually advertising their product. The publishers sell the game. They control the ecosystem. And in other larger esports like Overwatch League or League of Legends, they actually sell the franchising spots for millions of dollars that esports orgs have to pay fees to the publishers in order to even get into the actual competition. So the publishers have a monopoly on the whole esports business, and everyone else involved in it was chasing the golden goose that never laid the egg, right? So we saw this collapse. We saw many orgs disbanded over this time, and then COVID was the final blow to this bubble. And the FGC was in a unique position where, yeah, a lot of the orgs disbanded, but because most of our events were very grassroots and it was kind of a lightweight esports ecosystem, it was able to survive for a degree, right? And we've been able to sustain a pro tour, and players are still participating in that. And Capcom adapted to the times with the World Warrior program and lowered accessibility to make this more sustainable. I am worried EVO is going to inflate. We've already seen the scale increase. They're adding 4 EVOs a year, beyond just the saturation of the brand itself, diluting the legacy of the events. I am concerned that if Saudi, this is the next gold rush, all the teams that exist now are relying entirely on Saudi money funding them for the Esports World Cup, the club championship. They're all chasing the next guy with the big checkbook. It was VC investors previously, now it's Saudi, and now EVO is getting wrapped up into this mess. At some point, they might close that checkbook, and it might all collapse. So I have concerns about that. It's a weird time. There's going to be growing pains for sure. Like I said before, it's a very emotionally and politically charged topic. So I encourage you to do your own research and do whatever is best for you. But I hope, I wouldn't say I hope, I know that the FGC will be okay after this, no matter what happens to EVO. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't know exactly where this will go or how this will end. I hope that EVO can somehow survive this, but I have concerns. I definitely have concerns. That's it. I don't really have a positive note for this. I'm a little concerned. We'll see what happens. Anyways, that's it.